The autumn rain fell like judgment upon the weathered shingles of St. Bartholomew's church, each drop echoing through the empty nave like whispered confessions. Reverend Josiah Caldwell pulled his wool coat tighter as he climbed the creaking steps, his oil lamp casting trembling shadows against the peeling white walls. 20 years he'd tended this house of God in Millbrook County, Georgia, but never had it felt so forsaken as on this October evening in 1837. Peculiar business, asking a man of the cloth out on such a night, Josiah muttered, fumbling with a rusted lock. The telegram from the county magistrate had been brief. Come to the church immediately. Bring no one. Tell no one. Matter of gravest urgency. The heavy oak door groaned open, and Josiah froze. Standing in the center aisle, illuminated by a dozen flickering candles, was Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood, his normally composed face pale as communion wafer. Beside him stood Sheriff Amos Pritchard, a bear of a man who now appeared diminished, his hand resting uneasily on his pistol. Between them, chained to the iron baptismal font, knelt a man. But such a man as Josiah had never seen. He was massive, broad-shouldered and tall even in his kneeling position. His skin bore the countless scars of the lash, creating a tapestry of suffering across his bare back. But it was what encircled his neck that made Josiah's breath catch. An iron collar, 3 inches thick, with long prongs extending upward and outward like the grotesque petals of some infernal flower. The device was designed to prevent sleep, to make lying down an agony, to transform rest itself into torture. Blood crusted the points where the prongs had torn into the man's flesh. Reverend, Blackwood's voice was barely a whisper. This is Ezekiel. He was the property of the Thornwood plantation until 3 days ago. Was? Josiah approached slowly, his lamp raised. The plantation is gone, Reverend, burned to ash, and Overseer Silas Thornwood. The magistrate swallowed hard. We found him strangled, neck twisted clean around. Impossible for any man to do with bare hands, yet there were no tools, no weapons. Ezekiel's eyes dark, as the Georgia clay lifted to meet Josiah's. In them, the Reverend saw something that chilled him deeper than the October rain. Not rage, not hatred, but an emptiness so profound it seemed to swallow the very light of the candles. He ain't the first, Sheriff Pritchard interjected, his drawl thick with fear. We've been finding 'em for near 2 weeks now. Overseers, all of 'em. From different plantations scattered across 3 counties. 9 men, Reverend. 9 men strangled, their necks broke like kindling. And this one, he gestured to Ezekiel. He was found standing over the last body, calm as Sunday morning, waiting to be took. Why bring him to the church? Josiah asked, though dread was already forming an answer in his mind. Blackwood stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because something ain't natural here, Reverend. The bodies they wasn't just killed, they was arranged. Laid out in patterns, arms positioned just so, and each one. He paused, pulling a soiled handkerchief from his pocket and unwrapping it carefully. Inside lay 9 small iron rings, each stained dark with blood. We found these driven into their mouths, like wedding bands, Reverend, but made from shackle iron, melted down and reformed. Blackwood's hand trembled. We need you to speak with him, to determine if we're dealing with a man or something else entire. Josiah approached the kneeling figure, his theological certainty wavering with each step. Ezekiel hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, his breathing so shallow he might have been a statue carved from suffering itself. Can you speak? Josiah asked softly. For a long moment, silence. Then, in a voice like gravel sliding down a tomb, they made me wear the collar for stealing a Bible, Reverend. Said a slave had no business reading the Word of God. That was 4 years ago. 4 years, this iron has drunk my blood. Ezekiel's head tilted, the prongs scraping against the baptismal font with a sound like nails on a coffin lid. But I learned to read in secret before they caught me, learned about the plagues of Egypt, about divine retribution, about the angel of death that passed over the firstborn. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Only I ain't passing over nobody, Reverend. Outside, thunder rolled across the Georgia sky like the opening of graves. Reverend Josiah Caldwell felt the weight of Ezekiel's words settle upon the church like a shroud. The candles flickered, as if recoiling from what had been spoken, and in their wavering light, the shadows seemed to writhe along the walls with unnatural purpose. Blasphemy, Sheriff Pritchard spat, moving his hand fully to his pistol grip. We should hang him now and be done with it. No trial needed for a slave who's confessed to murder. 9 murders, Magistrate Blackwood corrected, his voice hollow. And he hasn't confessed, Amos. Not exactly. He turned to Josiah. That's why we need you, Reverend. We need to know what manner of evil we're dealing with. Josiah lowered himself onto the front pew, his aging knees protesting. He set the lamp beside him and studied Ezekiel's face, the high cheekbones, the network of scars, the eyes that held depths no man should have to carry. Despite the iron collar, despite the chains, there was a terrible dignity in how he held himself. Tell me about the first one, Josiah said quietly. The first overseer. Ezekiel's chest rose and fell, the iron prongs scraping against his collarbones. When he spoke, his voice carried the cadence of a man reciting scripture. His name was Josiah Crenshaw, worked the Blackwater plantation 15 miles south of here, mean as a snake and twice as quick with the whip. He's the one who put this collar on me 4 years back, said I needed to be broken proper. A bitter sound escaped his throat. 2 weeks ago, I was working the tobacco fields at Thornwood when I felt a calling, like the voice of Moses from the burning bush, only it came from inside the iron itself. The devil speaks through many vessels, Pritchard interjected, but Blackwood raised a hand for silence. Go on, Josiah urged. The voice told me Crenshaw's time had come, told me to walk, so I walked, left the fields in broad daylight, and nobody saw me go, like the Lord made me invisible to their eyes. I walked 15 miles, never stopping, never resting this collar, won't let me rest anyway. Found Crenshaw in his cabin, counting his wages, blood money, every coin. Ezekiel's eyes took on a distant quality, as if seeing through the church walls to some far-off place. I didn't choose to kill him, Reverend. My hands moved of their own accord, rose up like serpents and found his throat. He was a strong man, Crenshaw, fought like the devil himself. But the strength in my hands, it wasn't mine, wasn't human. His neck snapped like a dry twig, and when he was dead, my fingers moved to his mouth, pried it open. There was an iron ring waiting there, Reverend. Just appeared in my palm, hot as a brand fresh from the forge. I pressed it onto his tongue, and it melted into his flesh. The Reverend felt his skin crawl. And the others? Each night after, the voice would come, would tell me a name, a place. I'd walk, unseen, unstoppable. The collar that was meant to break me became my purpose. Each overseer I strangled, each mouth I sealed with iron, like the Lord sealing the mouths of lions for Daniel, only reversed. These lions I silenced forever. Magistrate Blackwood produced a leather journal from his coat. We've documented it all, Reverend. The distances are impossible. Ezekiel was seen at Thornwood Plantation on the same nights he supposedly killed men 20, 30 miles away. No horse, no wagon. The mathematics don't work unless something unnatural is at play, Josiah finished. He stood, approaching Ezekiel until he was close enough to smell the blood and iron. Why 9? Why stop at 9? For the first time, something like fear flickered across Ezekiel's face. I didn't stop, Reverend. The voice stopped speaking. After the 9th one, Silas Thornwood, the collar went silent. I stood over his body, waiting for the next name, but nothing came. For the first time in 2 weeks, I was alone, just a man again. That's when the sheriff's men found me. Thunder crashed overhead, so violent the church windows rattled in their frames. One of the candles guttered out, and in the sudden darkness, Josiah could have sworn he saw the iron collar gleaming with its own infernal light. "There's something you're not telling us," Josiah said. 9 is a significant number. 3 times 3, the number of divine judgment, but also the number of magistrates. Ezekiel interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire church. 9 magistrates who signed the law, allowing the iron collar to be used. 9 men who made my torture legal. Magistrate Blackwood's face went white as parchment. "That's impossible. That law was passed in secret session. Only the magistrates themselves knew who voted for it." Ezekiel's smile returned, terrible and knowing. "The iron knows, Magistrate Blackwood. The iron remembers. And 9 overseers were just the beginning." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like the fingers of the dead demanding entry. The silence that followed Ezekiel's words was broken only by the sound of Cornelius Blackwood's ragged breathing. The magistrate stumbled backward, his polished boots scraping against the worn floorboards, until he collided with a pew. His carefully maintained composure crumbled like ash. "He's lying," Blackwood gasped, though his trembling hands betrayed him. "The voting records were burned. There's no way he could know." "Who were the 9? Reverend Josiah asked, his voice cutting through the magistrate's panic with surgical precision. Blackwood's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Sheriff Pritchard stepped forward, confusion knitting his heavy brows together. "Cornelius, what's he talking about? What 9? But Ezekiel answered, his voice resonant as church bells tolling for the dead. "Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood of Millbrook County. Magistrate Thaddeus Whitmore of Savannah. Magistrate Elijah Crane of Augusta. Magistrate—" "Stop!" Blackwood's shriek echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Stop speaking!" "Magistrate Obadiah Stokes of Columbus. Magistrate Nathaniel Gray of Macon. Magistrate Jeremiah Ashford of Athens. Magistrate—" Josiah watched in horror as the iron collar around Ezekiel's neck began to glow, faint at first, like embers breathing to life. The air grew thick with the smell of heated metal and something else, something ancient and wrathful. Magistrate Solomon Pierce of Milledgeville. Magistrate Hiram Blackwell of Brunswick. Ezekiel's eyes locked onto Blackwood's, and the magistrate whimpered like a child. And Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood, who cast the deciding vote, who argued most passionately that slaves needed stronger correction and that the iron collar was God's own instrument for taming the savage. Pritchard's hand fell from his pistol, his face a mask of dawning comprehension and revulsion. "Cornelius, you told me that law was unanimous. You said it was a mercy, that it would prevent worse punishments. It was necessary." Blackwood's voice cracked. The plantations were losing money, slaves were running, reading, thinking they were— He stopped, seeming to realize the pit he was digging for himself. Josiah moved to stand between Ezekiel and the magistrate, though he wasn't certain whom he was protecting. "When did the killing start exactly? What date?" Blackwood fumbled in his coat pocket, withdrawing a crumpled paper with shaking hands. "October 1st. The first body was found October 2nd. "The anniversary," Ezekiel said softly. 4 years to the day since they locked this iron around my neck. 4 years of standing while others slept. 4 years of blood running down my chest. 4 years of praying for death, and God sending me something else instead. The glow of the collar intensified, casting strange shadows that seemed to take shapes human forms writhing in torment. Josiah felt sweat bead on his forehead despite the October chill. "What do you want?" the Reverend asked. "Vengeance? Justice? Mercy?" "I want nothing, Reverend. I am only the vessel. The iron wants what it has always wanted: balance. 9 overseers put these collars on men like me. 9 magistrates made it legal. The overseers have paid their debt. Now the iron collar demands the rest. "Then why are you here?" Pritchard demanded. "Why let us catch you? Why confess to the magistrate if you mean to kill him anyway?" For the first time, genuine emotion cracked through Ezekiel's supernatural calm, a flicker of fear, of humanity struggling against whatever force possessed him. "Because I didn't come here willingly, Sheriff. The collar brought me here, to this church, to consecrated ground. And I think," his voice broke, "I think the man I was is trying to fight what I've become. Brought me to the one place where maybe, just maybe, a man of God could break this curse before I kill again." Josiah's breath caught. "You're asking me to save you." "I'm asking you to save him," Ezekiel nodded toward Blackwood, "and the other 8 magistrates, because when midnight comes, the collar will take control again. And this time, I don't think the man inside will be strong enough to resist." As if in response to his words, the church bell began to toll, though no one had touched the rope. Josiah pulled out his pocket watch. 11 o'clock. 1 hour until midnight. Magistrate Blackwood slid down the pew to the floor, tears streaming down his face. "We thought we were maintaining order. We thought we were protecting our way of life. I never considered, never thought about the suffering, the humanity." "You made men into beasts," Ezekiel said, and the iron collar flared brighter. "And now the beast has come for its masters." Sheriff Pritchard grabbed Josiah's arm. "Can you do it, Reverend? Can you perform an exorcism, break a curse, whatever this requires?" Josiah looked at the chained man before him, at the glowing instrument of torture that had become an instrument of vengeance, and realized he was staring into the face of a justice so terrible it could only be called biblical. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have 1 hour to try." The bell tolled again, and in the spaces between its echoes, Josiah could have sworn he heard the whispered screams of every man who had ever worn an iron collar. Reverend Josiah Caldwell moved with purpose born of desperation. He strode to the altar, his hands trembling as he gathered the holy implements, the Bible, blessed water, communion wine, and the silver cross that had hung in street. Bartholomew's since before Georgia was a state. "Pritchard, light every candle in this church," Josiah commanded. "Darkness gives evil strength. Blackwood, get off the floor. If you want salvation, you'll earn it." The magistrate looked up, his face haggard. "What can I do?" "Pray," Josiah said simply, "and mean it for the first time in your miserable life." Ezekiel watched these preparations with eyes that seemed to shift between human brown and something else, a molten copper that reflected the collar's growing luminescence. "It won't work, Reverend. This isn't a demon you can cast out with prayers and holy water. This is older. This is iron and blood and 400 years of chains." 400? Pritchard paused in lighting a taper. "Since the first slave ship touched these shores," Ezekiel said, and his voice carried harmonics that weren't his own voices layered upon voices, generations of agony compressed into a single throat. "The iron remembers every chain, every collar, every shackle. All that suffering, it had to go somewhere, had to become something." Josiah approached, the silver cross held before him. "In the name of the Father." The collar pulsed with crimson light, and Josiah was thrown backward as if struck by an invisible fist. He crashed into the front pew, the cross clattering from his grip. Blood trickled from his nose. "I told you," Ezekiel said, and there was genuine sorrow in his voice beneath the supernatural resonance. "You're fighting history itself, Reverend. How do you exorcise centuries?" Pritchard helped Josiah to his feet. "There has to be a way. Everything has a weakness, even the devil himself." Josiah wiped the blood from his face, his mind racing through scripture, through folklore, through every whispered story of conjure and curse he'd dismissed as superstition during his 20 years in Georgia. Then his eyes fell upon the iron rings in Blackwood's handkerchief, the ones removed from the dead overseers' mouths. "The rings," he breathed. 9 rings for 9 overseers, but the cycle isn't complete. What are you thinking? Blackwood had risen, his politician's mind grasping at any thread of hope. Blood magic works in circles, Josiah said, piecing it together. 9 overseers, 9 magistrates. But what breaks a circle? What stops a curse of vengeance? Ezekiel's head tilted, the iron prongs scraping against his skin. Fresh blood welled from the wounds, dripping onto the church floor. Where the droplets fell, the wood seemed to darken, to char, as if the blood itself burned with internal fire. Atonement, Ezekiel whispered, and for a moment the man beneath the curse surfaced fully. The caller wants balance, but balance isn't just death for death, it's acknowledgement. It's witness. It's... His body convulsed, spine arching unnaturally. The church bell tolled. 11:30. When Ezekiel's eyes opened again, they were pure, molten copper, inhuman and ancient. Foolish mortal, the voice that emerged was not Ezekiel's at all. It was the voice of the iron itself, metallic, grinding, echoing with the screams of the damned. The flesh is weak, but the iron endures. At midnight, this vessel will rise, and the magistrates will fall. 9 more throats, 9 more rings. And then perhaps, the debt will be paid. Blackwood collapsed to his knees, praying in desperate, broken Latin he barely remembered from childhood. But Josiah's mind had seized upon something. Wait, perhaps. You don't know if 9 magistrates will be enough? The entity wearing Ezekiel's face smiled, terrible and cold. Suffering has no quota, Reverend. There are always more guilty, more who benefit from the chains, more who profit from the torture. The 9 magistrates are merely the beginning. After them, the plantation owners. After them, the merchants who sold the iron. After them, the ship captains who brought the cargo. After them, everyone, Pritchard said hollowly. It'll never stop. Until the iron is satisfied, the entity agreed. Until every drop of blood spilled under the lash is balanced by blood spilled in vengeance. Until America herself drowns in the debt she owes. Josiah felt the weight of it crushing down upon him, the magnitude of the injustice, the impossibility of the task. How could one reverend in one church stop a reckoning that perhaps, in some terrible way, was earned? But then he saw it, a tear sliding down Ezekiel's cheek, glowing faintly in the darkness. The man was still there, still fighting, still weeping for what his hands would be forced to do. The iron may be eternal, Josiah said, his voice gaining strength, but the man isn't. Ezekiel, if you can hear me, the iron can't act without a body. It needs you, and that means you have power too. The entity laughed, a sound like metal scraping stone. His will means nothing. At midnight, I take full dominion. Then we have 27 minutes to prove you wrong. Josiah turned to Blackwood and Pritchard. Get the blacksmith's tools from the parish house. Hammers, chisels, anything that can break iron. And bring me the old church ledger, the one from 1787. What good will an old ledger do? Pritchard asked. Because this church was part of the Underground Railroad, Josiah said, a desperate plan forming, and in that ledger are the names of every slave we helped to freedom, every chain we broke, every collar we removed. If iron remembers suffering, maybe it can remember mercy too. The bell tolled again, 11:45. The race against midnight had begun. Sheriff Amos Pritchard burst back through the church doors, his arms laden with blacksmith's tools that clanged together like discordant bells. Behind him, Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood clutched a massive leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age and secrets. Got them both, Pritchard panted, laying the hammers and chisels at Josiah's feet. But Reverend, I don't see how breaking the collar will help. The iron's already inside him, in his blood. You saw what happened when you tried the cross. Josiah took the ledger from Blackwood's trembling hands, running his fingers over the cracked leather. We're not going to break the collar, Amos. We're going to remind it what else it can be. He opened the book, and the smell of old ink and hope rose from its pages. There, in the careful script of his predecessor, Reverend Silas Merriweather, were the records, names, dates, and brief notations. The 12th of August, 1808, removed collar from Samuel, sent north with Quaker friends. God be with him. The 3rd of November, 1812, broke chains from Mary and her children. 5 souls freed this night. The iron bent to mercy's hammer. The 21st of June, 1819, cut shackles from Thomas. The iron wept as it broke, or perhaps that was only the rain, prayed over the broken pieces, buried them in the church garden where they might rust in peace. Page after page, year after year, a chronicle of iron transformed from instrument of bondage to symbol of liberation. Ezekiel, Josiah said, holding the ledger up. Can you hear these words? This same iron that tortures you has also set men free. It's not evil by nature. It's shaped by human hands, used for human purposes. It can be redeemed. The entity inhabiting Ezekiel's body snarled, the collar blazing so bright now that it cast red shadows across the walls. Pretty words from a pretty book. But where was this mercy when the collar was locked around this man's neck? Where was redemption during 4 years of bleeding, of standing, of praying for death that never came? It was absent, Josiah admitted, and the simple honesty of it seemed to momentarily quiet the entity. And that absence is a sin that stains this church, this county, this nation. But absence of good doesn't make evil eternal. It makes the good, when it finally comes, all the more necessary. 11:50, 10 minutes. Blackwood had been listening, his face transformed by something beyond fear understanding, perhaps, or the first stirrings of genuine remorse. Let me speak, he said, stepping forward. Let me confess. Your confessions mean nothing, magistrate. The entity hissed. Your kind always confesses when the noose tightens. Where was your conscience when you held the pen, when you signed the law? It was dead, Blackwood said, and his voice cracked with emotion. Dead and buried under ambition and greed, and the lie we told ourselves that some men were less than men. That suffering we didn't witness didn't exist. That profit justified any price paid by others. He knelt before Ezekiel, this powerful man prostrating himself before the chained and collared slave. I cannot undo what I've done. I cannot unwrite the law or unwear the collar from your neck. But I can name my sin. I can bear witness to your suffering, and I can offer my life in exchange for the 8 magistrates who don't yet know death is coming for them. The entity laughed. You think self-sacrifice will satisfy the iron? That one guilty life offered willingly equals 9 taken in vengeance? No, Blackwood said. One life is worth nothing measured against the thousands who suffered under my law. But maybe, he looked up at Josiah, desperately seeking guidance. Josiah understood. He opened the ledger again, this time to the final entries. Reverend Merriweather's last notation, written the night before he died. I have broken 40, 7 collars, filed through 39 chains, hammered apart 60, 2 shackles. The iron resists at first, always, but when the purpose is love, when the hand is steady, when the will is true, the iron remembers it was once ore in the earth, innocent of human cruelty. And it yields. He looked at the tools Pritchard had brought. The iron doesn't want blood, Ezekiel. It wants transformation. It wants to be broken and reforged, not destroyed, redeemed. For the first time, the copper glow in Ezekiel's eyes flickered. Beneath it, human brown fought to surface. The man inside me is weak, the entity said, but its voice wavered. 4 years of torment have nearly destroyed him. He cannot break free. He doesn't have to break free alone, Josiah said. He picked up the largest hammer, its handle worn smooth by the hands of the blacksmith who'd secretly helped Reverend Merriweather break chains in the dead of night. Iron is broken by iron. Evil is overcome by will, And curses are shattered when the cursed and the cursers stand together and say, "Enough." He held the hammer out to Blackwood. "You made the collar legal. You helped break this one." To Pritchard, "You enforce the laws. You add your strength." And to himself he whispered, "And I, who preached in this church while men wore collars in my county, will strike the first blow." 11:55. 5 minutes. Ezekiel's body convulsed violently, the entity screaming in metallic rage. "You cannot break what is already broken. This man is mine. The iron is mine. The vengeance is the Lord's," Josiah roared, and brought the hammer down upon the collar's lock. The impact rang out like a thunderclap. Sparks flew, but the lock held. Yet in that moment, in the space between the hammer's fall and the iron's resistance, something extraordinary happened. The collar screamed, not with Ezekiel's voice, but with the voices of every slave who'd ever worn iron. A chorus of agony and rage and sorrow that filled the church with sounds so overwhelming that the windows cracked, spider-webbing outward in crystalline patterns. And beneath that terrible symphony, Josiah heard something else. Ezekiel's voice, small but growing stronger. "Again," the man whispered through blood-flecked lips. "Please, again." Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood seized the hammer from Josiah's hands, his face set with grim determination. "My sin," he said, "my atonement." He swung with all his strength, and the hammer struck the collar's hinge. The impact sent a shockwave through the church. The remaining candles flared, their flames turning blue, then green, then a sickly yellow. The collar shrieked again, but this time the sound was different. Not just rage, but pain. The iron itself was suffering. "It's working!" Pritchard grabbed a chisel, wedging it into the crack Blackwood's blow had created. "Hit it again!" But the entity wasn't surrendering. Ezekiel's body rose against the chains, pulled upward by invisible force, until only his toes touched the ground. The baptismal font groaned, its iron fixtures bending as supernatural strength tested mortal restraints. "Foolish! You only make it angry." The entity's voice boomed from Ezekiel's throat, but it was fragmenting now, breaking apart like ice over a thawing river. "The midnight hour approaches. When the bell tolls 12, this vessel will be mine completely, and your hammer will mean nothing." 11:57. Josiah opened the ledger again, reading aloud over the chaos. "The 4th of July, 1821. This date chosen with intention. On the day this nation celebrates freedom, we broke the collar from Jacob. He wept to feel its weight lifted. We wept to see the scars it left. But we rejoiced that iron's purpose can be changed, that what was forged in cruelty can be unmade in love." As he read, something remarkable happened. The words seemed to take physical form, golden light emanating from the ancient pages. Where that light touched the collar, the metal dimmed, its hellish glow retreating like shadows before dawn. Ezekiel gasped, and when he spoke, it was his own voice, weak but present. "I can feel it. The man, Merriweather, his hands. I can feel every collar he broke, every chain he shattered. The iron remembers mercy, Reverend. You were right, but the hatred is so strong, so old." His body seized again, the entity reasserting control. The collar blazed brighter, and the prongs began to extend, growing longer like thorns from some demonic rose. They pierced deeper into Ezekiel's flesh, and he screamed in agony. "No!" Blackwood swung the hammer again, tears streaming down his face. "I won't let you have him. I won't let my evil create more evil." The hammer struck true, and one of the collar's prongs snapped off. It fell to the floor, where it didn't clang like metal should. Instead, it shattered like glass, and from its broken pieces rose smoke black, roiling, filled with whispering voices of the damned. Pritchard stumbled backward. "Lord have mercy. What have we unleashed?" "Not unleashed," Josiah said, understanding flooding through him. "Released. The suffering trapped in the iron. It has to go somewhere when the iron breaks. It can't just disappear. 11:58. The smoke coalesced, taking shapes, shadowy forms of overseers with twisted necks, of slaves bent under impossible burdens, of magistrates signing laws, of iron being forged in hellish foundries. The church was filling with phantoms, with history made manifest. "We have to absorb it," Josiah said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The suffering has to be witnessed, acknowledged, carried. That's the only way to break the curse completely. "How?" Blackwood demanded, still gripping the hammer. Josiah set down the ledger and spread his arms wide. "We bear witness. We take the pain into ourselves. We remember it, so the iron can forget." He closed his eyes and opened his heart, and the smoke rushed into him like a flood. Instantly, he felt it 4 years of Ezekiel's torture, compressed into a single moment. The weight of the collar, the prongs tearing flesh, the inability to sleep, to rest, to lie down, the humiliation, the dehumanization, the slow death of hope. Josiah fell to his knees, crying out in agony. But he didn't close his heart. He accepted it all. Seeing this, understanding what was required, Blackwood dropped the hammer and opened his arms as well. "I'm guilty," he whispered. "Let me carry what I created." The smoke engulfed him, and Blackwood screamed as the full weight of his sin materialized. He felt not just Ezekiel's pain, but the pain of every person who'd worn a collar because of his law. Dozens, hundreds, an endless parade of suffering. Pritchard hesitated only a moment before joining them. "I enforce these laws. I looked away from suffering. I chose order over justice. I'll carry my share." The 3 men knelt in the church, racked with the accumulated agony of the iron collar's history. And as they suffered, something miraculous happened. Ezekiel lowered gently to the ground, no longer held by supernatural force. The collar's glow was fading, its power draining as the 3 men absorbed the curse into their own bodies. The remaining prongs retracted, withdrew, became inert metal once more. "It's working," Ezekiel gasped, and he was fully himself now, the entity's presence receding. "I can feel it leaving. The iron is going quiet, going peaceful." 11:59. 1 minute remained. Josiah looked up through tears of pain and saw Ezekiel watching them, 3 men suffering by choice what he had suffered by force. And in Ezekiel's eyes, something was changing. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps never, but understanding, recognition of shared humanity. "The final blow," Josiah said to Blackwood. "Strike it now, while the iron is weakened, while the curse is divided. Break it and break the cycle." Blackwood retrieved the hammer with trembling hands. He positioned the chisel one last time against the collar's central lock, the mechanism that had held it closed for 4 years. "For every soul I wronged," he said, "for every law I twisted, for every time I chose profit over people, for every—" The church bell began to toll midnight. Blackwood swung. The hammer fell as the bell's first toll echoed through Street Bartholomew's church. Metal met metal with a sound like the world breaking open. The collar didn't simply crack, it exploded into fragments, each piece spinning through the air, trailing light like fallen stars. The prongs, the hinges, the lock, the band itself all shattered simultaneously. 4 years of torture atomized in an instant. Ezekiel collapsed forward, free for the first time since 1833, his hands instinctively reaching for his neck. Where the iron had been, there was only raw, bleeding flesh, scars upon scars, wounds that would never fully heal. But the collar was gone. The church itself seemed to exhale, ancient timbers settling, windows ceasing their rattling. The supernatural cold that had gripped the sanctuary fled, replaced by the natural October chill. The phantoms in the smoke wavered, becoming translucent, their whispers fading to silence. But something was wrong. Magistrate Blackwood stood frozen, the hammer still raised, his face locked in an expression of profound horror. His skin had gone gray as ash, and when Josiah reached for him, the magistrate's body was cold as iron. "Cornelius!" Pritchard grabbed his friend's shoulder, and Blackwood toppled backward like a felled tree. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, eyes open but unseeing. "No, no, no." Josiah pressed his fingers to Blackwood's throat, searching for a pulse. "They're faint, irregular, but present. He's alive, but barely. The curse taking it into himself, it was too much." Ezekiel crawled forward, chains still binding his wrists and ankles, blood dripping from his ravaged neck. He looked down at the unconscious magistrate, and his expression was complex layers of hatred, pity, and something that might have been respect warring for dominance. "He took my suffering willingly," Ezekiel said, his voice hoarse from screaming. 4 years of it, in a single moment. No man could endure that and remain whole. Sheriff Pritchard's face was pale, sweat beading his forehead. "I feel it too, like iron weights on my soul, like I'm drowning in guilt, in knowledge of what we've done." He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "How many times did I return runaways? How many times did I enforce laws I knew were evil? How many?" "Too many," Josiah said quietly, his own body still trembling from the absorbed curse. "We all have. That's what the iron showed us. That's what it wanted. Not just death, but understanding, true witness to the suffering." The bell continued to toll. Second strike, third, fourth. With each toll, the fragments of the shattered collar began to move. They slid across the floor like iron filings drawn to a magnet, converging at the center of the church. But they weren't reforming into a collar. Instead, they were melting, pooling together into liquid metal that glowed with residual heat. "What's happening?" Pritchard whispered. Ezekiel watched, transfixed. "It's not finished. The collar held the suffering of hundreds, maybe thousands. We took some of it, weakened it enough to break. But the iron itself, it still carries the memory." The molten metal began to shape itself, rising up like a serpent, twisting and coiling. For a moment, Josiah feared it would reform into something worse, another instrument of vengeance. But then he saw what it was becoming. A tree, an iron tree, its branches spreading, its roots digging into the church floorboards. And hanging from each branch, like terrible fruit, were collars, hundreds of them, each one representing a life shackled, a soul tormented. "The memorial," Ezekiel breathed. "It's showing us, all of them, every person who wore iron, every name the world forgot." As they watched, names began to appear on the collars, etched in light. Samuel, Mary, Thomas, Jacob. The names from Reverend Merriweather's ledger, but also countless others' names never recorded, never remembered, lost to history, but preserved in the iron's terrible memory. Ezekiel, his own name appeared on the largest collar, the one at the tree's crown. Josiah understood. It's not a curse anymore. It's a monument, a witness carved in iron. The bell tolled its 8th strike. Suddenly, Blackwood gasped, his eyes flying open. He sat up, clutching his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I saw them," he choked out. "All of them. Not just the ones who wore the collar, the ones who died from it, the ones who went mad, the children who grew up watching their parents bleed, the mothers who couldn't comfort their babies because the prongs prevented them from lying down, the fathers who lost their minds from sleeplessness. I saw." He couldn't continue, overcome by sobs. Pritchard knelt beside him, his own face wet with tears. "I saw them too. God help me, I saw them." Ezekiel reached out with shackled hands and touched Blackwood's face, forcing the magistrate to meet his eyes. "Now you know," he said simply. "Now you understand what your law meant, what it did, what it cost." The 9th toll. The iron tree pulsed with light, and from its roots, something emerged. 9 iron rings, identical to the ones Ezekiel had placed in the mouths of the dead overseers. They rolled across the floor, coming to rest at Blackwood's knees. "The magistrates," Josiah said. "The curse still wants them." Ezekiel looked at the rings, then at his own hands, then at the 3 men who had suffered alongside him. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. The iron wants completion, justice. But justice can take different forms. Death is one, but witness. He looked at the tree with its burden of remembered names. Witness is another. He picked up the 9 rings, the metal cold against his scarred palms. I could kill them. The entity gave me that power, and some part of it remains. I could hunt down every magistrate who signed that law and strangle them with these bare hands. The iron would sing with approval. The 10th toll. Or, Ezekiel continued, I could deliver these rings to them not as weapons but as reminders. Let them wear these rings. Let them carry the weight of what they've done. Let them live with the knowledge we forced upon ourselves tonight. Let them be witnesses too. He looked at Josiah. What does your God say, Reverend? Is it mercy to kill evil men quickly, or mercy to let them live with understanding of their evil? The 11th toll. Josiah had no answer. In all his years of scripture and sermon, he had never confronted a question so terrible, so perfectly balanced between damnation and redemption. The 12th toll began to sound. The 12th toll of midnight hung in the air, suspended like a held breath. In that frozen moment between vengeance and mercy, between justice and grace, Ezekiel stood at the center of street. Bartholomew's church, 9 iron rings in his scarred hands, and the weight of history pressing down upon his shoulders. Reverend Josiah Caldwell watched the man's face, seeing the war being waged behind his eyes. 4 years of torture, 4 years of bleeding, 4 years of standing while the world slept. How could any force on earth or in heaven ask him to choose mercy? And yet, my father, Ezekiel said softly, breaking the silence, was a preacher on a plantation in South Carolina. They didn't allow him to read, but he memorized scripture from hearing it spoken. He taught me in secret, in the dark hours before dawn. He taught me that vengeance belongs to the Lord, but he also taught me that justice is the foundation of God's throne. He looked down at the rings, their metal still warm from the transformation. Which is this, Reverend? Justice or vengeance? Josiah's throat tightened. I don't know, son. I truly don't know. Then I'll tell you what I do know, Ezekiel said. Killing those magistrates won't undo 4 years of this collar, won't heal these scars, won't bring back the years of sleep I've lost, the dignity they stole, the humanity they tried to break. Their deaths would change nothing for me. He walked to the iron tree, its branches gleaming in the candlelight, each collar bearing its name like a gravestone. But this changes something. This makes them visible. Makes us visible. Every name here is a witness that we existed, that we suffered, that we mattered. Magistrate Blackwood pulled himself to his feet, leaning heavily on Sheriff Pritchard. His face was haggard, aged 10 years in a single night. If you spare the magistrates, he said, his voice cracking, what would you have us do? How can we possibly atone? Ezekiel turned to face him, and the look in his eyes was unflinching. You can't. There is no atonement sufficient for what was done, no penance great enough, no sacrifice that balances the scales. But, he held up the rings, you can witness, you can remember, you can carry the weight we carried, not in iron around your necks, but in knowledge in your hearts. He pressed the 9 rings into Blackwood's hands. Take these to the other 8 magistrates. Make them put these rings on their fingers. Tell them what you experienced tonight. Make them understand, truly understand what their law meant, what it did, what it cost. And then, Pritchard asked, and then you spend the rest of your lives trying to break every collar, every chain, every shackle in Georgia. You use your positions, your power, your privilege, all the things that made you dangerous, and you turn them toward liberation. You become the thing you feared, men who free slaves. Josiah felt his heart swell with something between hope and anguish. The law won't allow it. You know that. Georgia will hang them for helping slaves escape. Then they hang, Ezekiel said simply. They wanted to avoid death tonight. I'm offering them the choice. Die now by my hands in the dark, or die later on a gallows in the light, having done something righteous with the years between. Which would you choose, Magistrate? Blackwood stared at the rings in his palms, and when he looked up, there was steel in his expression, the resolve of a man who had seen hell and chosen to walk back through it by choice. The gallows, he said. I choose the gallows. Pritchard nodded slowly. And I'll help him, even if it costs me everything. Ezekiel's shoulders sagged, the supernatural strength that had sustained him finally draining away. He was just a man again, broken, scarred, exhausted beyond measure. Josiah rushed forward as Ezekiel's legs buckled, catching him before he fell. Easy, son, easy now, it's over. Is it? Ezekiel whispered. Will it ever really be over? Josiah had no answer to that. Instead, he helped Ezekiel to a pew, then knelt and began removing the chains from his wrists and ankles. The shackles fell away, clattering to the floor, and for the first time in 4 years, Ezekiel was completely free. He wept then, great, shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. Not tears of joy, but tears of release of pain too long held, of suffering finally acknowledged, of a burden shared, even if it could never be fully lifted. Blackwood approached slowly, reverently. I will do as you ask, all of it, and I will start by introducing legislation to ban the iron collar throughout Georgia. It will fail. I know it will fail, but I will introduce it again and again until my dying breath. Your suffering will not be forgotten. I swear it on my soul. Ezekiel looked up at him, eyes red and swollen. Your soul is already forfeit, Magistrate. Swear it on something that still has value. Swear it on their names. He gestured to the iron tree with its burden of collars. On their names, Blackwood repeated, his voice solemn as an oath. On every name the iron remembers. I swear it. 3 months later, Reverend Josiah Caldwell stood in the garden behind Street Bartholomew's church, watching as workers planted the iron tree in consecrated ground. It had become a pilgrimage site, a place where freed slaves and abolitionists came to remember, to witness, to pray. Ezekiel had disappeared the morning after that terrible night, taking with him only a Bible and the clothes Josiah had given him. Some said he'd made it north to freedom. Others claimed he'd stayed in Georgia, moving through the shadows, helping to break collars wherever he found them. Josiah didn't know which story was true. But he knew this. Magistrate Blackwood had kept his word. The legislation had failed, as predicted, but 5 magistrates had resigned their positions rather than wear the iron rings. 2 had fled the state. 1 had taken his own life, unable to bear the weight of understanding. And Blackwood himself had been arrested 3 weeks prior for harboring fugitive slaves in his own home. He would hang within the month. Josiah touched the iron tree's trunk, feeling the names beneath his fingers. So many names, so much suffering. But also, now, witnesses, remembrance, and perhaps, in time, something like justice. The iron would not forget. The tree would stand as long as the church stood, a monument to pain and to the choice one man made to break the cycle of vengeance. Mercy had not erased the evil, but it had transformed it into something the world could not ignore. And sometimes, Josiah thought, that was the truest form of justice after all. The end. In memory of all those who wore iron, whose names history forgot, but whose suffering the earth remembers.